Hi everyone, today's presentation is called Help, My Students Don't Write Incomplete Sentences. I think we've all been there where we have students turn in their writing and we start to go through the writing and we come across this paper where a student turned in this paper that's one big blob and there's maybe like 3 sentences or maybe it's all one sentence. And our emotions range from like anger to confusion to just questioning ourselves. Did I not teach them how to write incomplete sentences? Did I not tell them to edit their writing? And it is frustrating to see student writing that's not incomplete sentences. But what do we actually do about that? How do we get students to turn in more quality writing that has complete sentences? And not just complete sentences, but quality sentences, different sentence types. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present to you 7 different strategies that will help you move your students toward writing in more complete and quality sentences. So the first strategy that I'm going to lay out is called sentence level writing activities. So this is something that you'd use as a class starter during a writing unit where you would incorporate some instruction around different sentence types. So how I would do this is I would alternate between teaching about a certain sentence type and then having students practice using that sentence type. The different sentence types that I'm going to try this year to teach my students in every writing unit that I do are sentences with the positives, compound sentences, complex sentences, listing items in a series, which is more of a comma rule, but it also can show students a sentence structure. And then I would model sentences using those different sentence types from the mentor text we're using for that writing unit and have students actually practice writing those sentence types for their topic of the paper or piece of writing that they're doing. So I want to show you what this looks like. So on the first day, I would use this as a class starter and I would just teach students about complex sentences. What are complex sentences? How do you start complex sentences? And we would just go over the basics of that and talk about that. And then the next day, I would actually have students try to write in complex sentences, and I would make sure that they see complex sentences from the mentor text we're using for that writing unit. The example that you see up on the screen is from the memoir vignettes writing unit that I use, and it just starts with, as I reach the top, my eyes scan the room to see everything the same. When I make my way up the staircase, stockings are meticulously hung along the railing. So students are seeing complex sentences from the mentor text, and then they get a chance to write sentences in that for their memoir vignettes then and practice it. And then I would have them keep a sheet, something like that's pictured on the screen, where as they're practicing their different sentence types, they're holding on to them maybe in a notebook or on a sheet like this. And once again, if I'm using this as a class starter, I would alternate between instruction and student practice. And then once we get to drafting, students would actually have a place where they've drafted a lot of sentences. I don't require them to use those sentences in their writing, but I have seen students find it really helpful to use sentences that they've practiced in their writing. So this is the first strategy. The next strategy seems almost too simple, but it's just sentence counting. So you would actually have students go in and maybe they did a reading response or maybe it's a longer piece of writing, and you would actually just have them count their sentences in each paragraph. And you can just see in the picture, a picture of my writing, and I just jotted down the number of sentences in each paragraph off to the side. What does this do? Well, this assumes that students have sentences, and this also shows students like how many sentences they have in each paragraph. And they can just get a quick gauge on by just simply counting. Sometimes you might have a student come up to you and say, I only have 1 sentence in my paragraph. And that's probably a good time to go back to them and just say, I bet you, it looks like you have a paragraph of writing there. So if you only have 1 sentence, how could you go back through and make sure that you are separating your ideas out into complete sentences and not just having one large run-on sentence? The next strategy is to use sentence starters. So sentence starters, I like to use them in a reading response kind of format. So you can see on the screen a couple of different examples of how to use sentence starters. The first one is on the left is more of like an exit ticket. And so I've asked students a specific reading response question, given them the sentence starter to get them started with that. The one on the right is more of like a paragraph reading response. And I teach students to use a topic sentence to give evidence and explanation and to give an analysis. So I've given sentence starters for those 3 different pieces. I don't believe sentence starters are giving students the answer. You're not telling them the thinking that they should do in response to that question. You're just eliminating that barrier, teaching them how to flip a question, teaching them how to start a sentence in a strong way, and that will eventually transfer into their own writing as they're initiating that in your class and other classes. The next strategy, strategy number 4, is to have students write often and for a variety of purposes. So when I'm doing reading units with students, we're writing every single day. Students might be doing an exit ticket, some kind of a formative assessment, reading response, but we are doing writing in more single setting opportunities, sometimes just a couple of sentences, sometimes a paragraph or 2, but we're writing every single day. In a writing unit, we are more going through the writing process, but once again, we're writing every single day, different purposes, but we're still writing frequently. We need to give students time to write and practice. I also think that no matter what type of writing you're having students do, you should have some kind of a mentor text for students to be able to look at. You should have time for students to edit. You should be giving continuous feedback to students on their writing, and possibly consider keeping an editing checklist anchor chart like the one pictured on the screen to just remind students, and also to remind yourself of the prompts to give students about the different things they should be thinking about in their writing. The next strategy is called surveying writing for sentence types. So if you are teaching students about simple, compound, and complex sentences, you could have them have the 3 different colors that they're highlighting for the 3 different sentence types, and to just go through and highlight which sentences fall into which sentence type. What this does is they can quickly go through and see, oh, all my paragraphs are complete yellow. I only use simple sentences. And then we could talk to students further about, well, how could we take 2 simple sentences and combine them into a compound sentence? How could we add a beginning to a simple sentence to make it into a complex sentence? Just vary our different sentence types. And it opens the doors for some good conversation there. Also helps students really think about and know the different sentence types. Strategy 6 is to listen to writing aloud. So when you can hear your writing, it really helps you hear your sentences, how they flow together. So a couple different ways to do this. A real simple way, have students partner up and read their writing aloud to each other. Another way you could do this is you could use a screen recording app like Screencastify, have students read their writing piece into the app and listen back to it, and then they can really hear themselves as they follow along on the screen with their writing. Another option would be to use in Google Docs, there's speech to text options where you can have the Google Doc actually read it to you. And then the last strategy is to focus our feedback on sentences. So I know that I'm guilty of this. And what I do a lot of times when I'm doing a writing rubric for a longer writing piece is I might have 6 to 7 different pieces of criteria that I'm using where, I'm focused on the introduction, the organization, word choice. And then I have this criteria at the very bottom that says writing conventions. And that is the only place that I'm giving feedback and grading on sentences. So if we want students to get better at sentences, we need to get better at giving them feedback on the sentences that we're using if we think that's an important piece, which I do think it is really important. If students don't have strong sentences, they're not going to be able to create writing that's clear and concise, and also just really freely communicate their ideas to an audience. So this rubric that I have pictured on the screen is looking at things like, does the student write incomplete sentences? Do they use commas appropriately within sentences? Do they use a variety of sentence types? And do they have strong sentence fluency? So the rubric also pictured on the screen, I have as a free download, which I'll put the link right after this video so that you can check that out if you are interested. Those are the 7 different strategies that I have. You can read the full blog post that I just went over in detail at my blog, theliteracyeffect.com. And I will also answer any questions that you put in the chat below. Thank you so much for tuning in.